All right, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for having us. And we're presenting Chogue, which has a very simple premise, and that is if chess and the original rogue had a child, what would it look like? So I made this game with Pippin Barr, who couldn't come here, but he's there on the sidebar and, and might comment if he feels that I'm not rendering this correctly. So before moving on, what is Chogue? I mean, what is the child of chess and rogue? It's Chogue. It's there. I can show it to you, and you'll see how it works. So you're presented with a basic chessboard, and so if you know how to play chess, you probably have some already great opening prepared, and so you can just move forward and do your opening. That's not a standard one, but I'm planning for something. Oh, what happened? What happened? You might have not have noticed, but the black king left. But what's a chess game without the black king? What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to checkmate him. So we're quite happy with our splash screen because we need no exposition. There's no text, no explanation. It's chess, but there's already a mystery. Where's the black king? We need to find the black king. So I suppose you probably are seduced into maybe looking at those stairs there and getting there. This is why I got my knight, because we have our little routine to go there without any fighting. But you can actually play that game and feel very good because the AI is quite poor. But so here, but now things are changing quite a lot. Doesn't look like chess much more. These are actually my pieces that have been carried over to some other little mini chessboard. Except that I have two queens now because as the pawns have reached the end of that room, they became queens. I'm quite packed there, so I'll try to move out. And okay, so this is a queen. And as you can see now, the queen can venture into her possible moves outside the visible zone, which is maybe scary, but I need to go somewhere. So let's see what happens as I move there. Oh, ah! Did you see that? There was a black bishop just lurking in the dark. And as I moved into a dark room, it just ate me. And that's the end of my queen. Oh. This is the essence of Chogue. So I'll go back to Chogues. Okay, all right. So this is Chogue. This is the hybrid between chess and rogue, and so we got it. That's it. However, if you start thinking, there might be many other kinds of Chogues out there that would be valid Chogues, both valid hybrids between those two games. So these two games can have multiple, very different children. And so this talk is why this one? So just quick presentations because we're new to the roguelike scene. So I'm Jonathan Lessard, at Glandeur Lessard on Twitter. I'm an early indie dev, I suppose. My first bigger game was in 2002 already. Mostly adventure games by then, and that's before Steam, so I had actually to print the CDs and send them by mail, if you can imagine the ordeal. However, in between, I did a PhD on adventure games, as this was the only thing I knew, and now I'm a game design professor at Concordia University in Montreal. And so I still do games, but that are more of an experimental or research nature. So for example, I have a lab that's called the Lab that inquires into interactive conversations with NPCs. So we have a series of natural language games, for example. This one is you need to convince this guy through natural language to convert to your religion. However, you have to make up that religion as you go. So kind of things I'm doing right now. Pippin maybe needs less presentation. He did it the other way as me. He started with a PhD and then proceeded to make some very interesting, artistic, conceptual games. One of the first one was an adaptation of Marina Abramovich's famous performance, The Artist is Present, in a more or less adventure game kind of form. And more recently, he's doing speculative games, amongst other things. You should all check them out. This one is a game for the future in which there is no more work to do in the post-work future. However, some humans might feel they don't have anything to do. So this is an app to get you working all day. And so you have tasks to do. And it's quite depressing, while at the same time quite funny. So anyways, he's also a game design professor at the same university, Concordia University in Montreal. And we're colleagues, and we decided to be nice to make games together. And our first game was game studies 2 years ago, since we're game professors. We made a game about some major concepts of game studies and poked fun a bit on them. This tableau is about immersion, and I'll let you find out how we portray immersion in that game. So, we were looking for another game to do, and we had chess on our mind because we had been obsessively playing chess for a summer, and Pippin Barr beat me every single game, I have to admit. And then we also have roguelikes in our mind because we're looking at procedural generation maybe, and maybe narrative generation. So at some point we stumbled upon that idea, rogue chess. So, but that wasn't totally, we thought that sounded like an amazing idea, but we wanted to find another angle to it just so that there might be some kind of concept or research to it. And so at that point, we're also trying to corner a kind of a more rigorous methodology for the research creation approach, which is you have a question about game design or some theory, and you see how it goes by making an actual game of it. But if you want to learn about design, looking only at the end result is insufficient because the end result is only part of the story, and all the steps that led you there is usually the actual story and where the knowledge was actually built. So we came up with the MDMA model with our other colleague, Rila Khaled, and we don't exactly know what it stands for, but it's Method for Design Materialization Analysis, or Mapping Design Moves approach. Anyways, the whole point is mostly to document every single step as you go forward. And for example, and your sponsor will be happy because Chogue is on GitHub. And you have, for example, our whole correspondence, so all the emails we sent back and forth as we're discussing that game and developing it, the design journal, but also all the code, obviously, which is great because if you want to know why did we make that decision, I can look at the design journal, but I can, of course, also pull out how the prototype was looking like at that moment and sort of inform that decision at that specific moment. I mean, Chogue is an unimportant game, but imagine if we had this for NetHack, apparently, for example. Oops, wrong window. Sorry for showing you an academic paper. You can close your eyes if that makes you nauseous. But I wanted to, what I like here is the title. Because we see making a game, especially with a research game, as a trajectory in design space that you want to document. And the problem with most games is that the design space is almost infinite. At every given point, there are so many options you can draw from that it's quite a messy space if you want to map it out. But with Chogue, we decided to do a more constrained experiment. It's not that we're going to do a hybrid that pulls from this one and the other, and freely we can do whatever we want. We set ourselves that any design aspect of Chogue had to come either from chess or from Rogue, and from nothing else outside of this. So this is a design space that can actually be mapped out, which is interesting. So this is what we came up with, what we can more or less synthesize this at the end, but these are the relevant items of design in that game, and for each one of them we had to make a decision. Will we pull from chess or will we pull from Rogue? And also there are rooms for some kind of spectrum in between, because as you'll see, some decisions are quite difficult. So the result is, at least for us, the game is surprisingly fun, but mostly in ways that are very different from the models. And it's also different from what we expected it to work like. And also we find it's an interesting game design case study because it's like a miniature. When you have big systems, it's hard to find out what really contributes to what are necessary. But in this case, every single thing is important, and it sort of shows the dynamic that worked in chess and how it worked in Rogue. And when you pull something out, how everything crumbles, and when you reassemble in some new way, it works in very new dynamics. Anyways, it's like a miniature, interesting game studies, which forced us to better understand both the design of chess and of Rogue as we were doing this. So the rest of this talk is looking at little points of contention in the merging of those two things. So our main premise was that we would take the chess units and bring them into the Rogue world. That was our point of departure, but we could have done the exact opposite, for example. So there is a totally valid roguelike, the totally valid Chogue, in which you play in a chessboard, but with the rogue pieces there, and who knows what would happen. And we could have a discussion as to whether a kestrel is a pawn or what would be the perfect match for that. So we chose the Rogue world, which led us to immediately some design problem, because Rogue has one tile large corridors, but how can a bishop navigate that corridor? And knights as well. So that meant knights and bishops would just be stuck in the first room. And as we're discussing, we laughed a lot about that possibility, but in the end, that wouldn't make for a very interesting game if half your pieces will always be stuck there. So we had to make this little compromise where the corridors are at least two, they're always 2 cells wide, so that your bishop can stupidly zigzag its way through it. And when you go into the later levels and a bishop is all you have left, that you actually have to do that. Also, it was a bit hard to read when you were using the actual Rogue resolution, the number of tiles. So we also ended up diminishing the number of tiles. So once again, a hybrid between the two models. We're thinking of using a camera that you could translate, but then we didn't have that precedent in neither of the models, so we decided to leave it away. As for unit moves, as advertised, we used the chess move patterns, whereas Rogue would have been just 1 tile per turn. Which led to an interesting problem, that of the knight, because the knight can technically go over units in chess. However, can a chess go over a wall? Can a knight go over a wall? It's kind of a metaphysical question, because we either have to interpret that chess knights, do they wiggle their way because they're agile between pawns, or do they teleport in some way? So we have these little gems of conversation for, this is Pippin. When you lift a piece from the board and place it in a new location, how is that perceived by the other pieces, so to speak? Do they live in a 2D world, in which case lifting and placing down a piece is a form of teleportation? So you have to solve these very hard problems doing this. But so we chose that yes, they do teleport, which made sense with the way we had implemented the valid moves for chess pieces, because we didn't exactly know how to approach that problem with an arbitrary, randomly generated space. So we thought we were quite clever since this was done in Unity, by attaching colliders for possible moves for all the different pieces. And so as you can see, the knight there has these little floating colliders around, which means that it will just disregard walls anyways. So by the way, I thought this was a pretty clever thing, and as I did it, I was happy because it was implemented very quickly. But at some point, I was wondering why the game was running at 2 FPS, and this is why. So the queens have huge colliders, and there are many queens. You can have up to 50 units, and you have all these cells that all have their own colliders. So yeah, I didn't think that far ahead. So anyways, some optimization makes it correct now. Combat, so once again, we use the chess. So that's a big one. Well, you use the chess pattern where you die on a single hit, whereas Rogue would be you chip away at the HP until it's dead. And that's a pivotal point, and we're actually working on a sequel, Cherry Chogue, in which we just reverse those two things, in which the units actually have HP and can chip away at each other, and it changes everything. And then turn taking is also an interesting one, because you would assume that both games are turn-based, and so there's perfect, let's say, compatibility between both. But as you look at it in details, there are actually many flavors of turn-based. In chess, yes, you each one have a turn, but not all units have a turn. You choose which of the unit have a turn and then move it. However, in Rogue, each player alternately plays all its pieces. I mean, for the player, you don't really notice because you have just one piece, but you do technically play all your pieces. But the enemies, definitely, they play all their pieces at once. And we thought that was interesting. That's the first version that we tried out. And the interesting thing of having all this on source control is that I can look back at how this looked like at the time. And yeah, it actually makes everything different. If you imagine chess this way, imagine first player can just move all its pieces, and then second player moves all its pieces. So once again, changes everything. Whoops, my only unit is there on a little island. As you can see, the early generation was very different. Here. So it's actually super scary to see all those black units move one by one, and it changes your chess thinking really, because you're trying to plan where they will be on the next turn. So that's not an easy one. It's also then there was these little questions as if you have to move all your pieces and you move all of them across all the time? Wouldn't that be kind of tedious? And what's the order? Do you have to cycle through all of them? In which order do you arbitrarily choose? And then we need to tell the player, yes, this one has already moved and all that. So anyways, it felt like it was a bit too complicated. So we reverted back to just chess move. You choose which one, they choose which one, and that's how we move forward. Then there's the question of unit states. In Rogue, that's a big thing. You have HP, you have armor, you have weapons, you have spells, you have items and all that. That's a lot of things to implement. And so once again, we kept with chess units where the only state change is pawns. And they can change to a queen. And then this led to another kind of metaphysical question in which, since there is no walls in chess, what's the spirit of that rule? Is it that pawns are rewarded for crossing the whole board? Or is it that once they meet a wall, they can change? But if we go with the first interpretation, what's the end of the board in Rogue? Is at the top of the screen, but considering the generation, sometimes you never reach the top of the screen. So anyways, we just left it with walls, and that allows you to essentially convert all your pawns immediately, and that's fine because you're really happy with queens in that world, because they move much faster, obviously. Pawns are kind of stupid for any turning. They can just go forward, right? Another huge one is visibility. So chess is the hallmark of chess is that it's a full information game. Okay, it's a full information game, whereas Rogue, of course, makes sense because there's a fog of war and you explore things that you've never explored. So to us, that was the meaningful thing to do. But the moment I implemented those rules, it immediately occurred to me that the combination of all our design decisions before that sort of congealed over that thing. And when you have the Rogue world with chess moves and chess attacks where you can get wiped out in just one hit, and Rogue visibility, you essentially turn chess into a survival horror. And this is my email the moment I implemented this is, you'll notice that the pieces still play well in the dark. There's something to it. It feels horrible to venture in the dark and then see your queen eaten by a rook who's just lurking there in the shadows. And that really changed the outlook of Rogue, of Chogue. But at first I had implemented the exact rules of Rogue, which means that once you come out of the room, you still see the outlines of the room, but you don't see the units in there, which led to some very hardcore patterns. So this is Pippin responding. So it really does feel too unfair. The joke of being captured out of the dark is funny, but there's something not good about repeatedly getting into a new room, then instantly being captured, leaving it dark again, so you don't, if a queen was in there, you don't see it anymore, you just know that it's in there and it might be moving. Leaving it dark again until you go into it again, get captured again. So there was these moments where you could just drain your whole party trying to cross one room with a roaming queen in there. So we ended up, there was some fun, or at least some surprise to it, but we ended up doing some compromise where once you've opened a room visible, made a room visible, it remains visible chess-like. So once again, there is some compromise there. And that's become like a hallmark of Chogue now, that moment, the capture in the dark thing. World progression, so chess has a single world, nothing to be said there, and Rogue has successive levels, so definitely that was our target. However, and game designers out there, you know how this happens, that you make a seemingly obvious decision, and a slew of mini problems come out of this. So for example, then, what do we choose? Is it okay that a single unit goes there and then you move forward? Or do you need to bring all your units to the stairs? And if this is the case, what about the stupid bishops? Because it's likely that some of them won't ever go to the stairs because they're not on the right color. And then what then? You still move on? So then we need to know whether some bishops are still there but won't ever be able to go there. So we decided to just go get one there, also because of the tedium of moving all the pieces. But then how do they come out? Do they come out one by one? And then you have to move them and make space for the other one and move them? Or do they all pop out all at once? But then where do you put them? Will there be enough space for them? Well, anyways, that's the daily job of game design. And once again, as we move forward, we discover these new features of how these mechanics work together. For example, we discovered the cowardly king dynamic, whereas since we had a chess victory, you need to capture the black king, but a rogue world progression where there are multiple levels, I discovered at some point that the king would flee. So the king, this is me writing, the king now wants to avoid being eaten at all costs. And I had a great moment where I was trying to corner him, and he fled by the stairs. So this is both hilarious and super frustrating because the king appears in a very late level, so you've really worked hard to get there. So you finally see him, and you try to corner him, but boom, he flees by the stairs, and you got to do yet another level to find him. All right, so the Cowardly King was a surprise. And then there's the problem of general progression. So as the game is put together, we can look at how it works on the long term. And on chess, the long term is entropy on both sides. Everybody loses pieces, and at some point there is resolution. And in Rogue, there's growth on both sides. Your character gets stronger, the enemies get stronger, and also there's some kind of resolution at some point. But at this point in Chogue, you had this asymmetry where for the player, it was entropy, you just lose pieces, and for the enemies, they just get more numerous, and obviously that's a dead end. It will just, sure death awaits at some point. So we thought it would be good to maybe bring some possibility to replenish, just like in Rogue. And so we're thinking, okay, so there's no HP for our units, so what does it mean to maybe replenish your HP? And so we brought back the notion of items from Rogue, but in this case, you don't replenish HP, but you get new party members. And so the metaphor is that party members are the equivalent of HP in Rogue, and the more you have, the more you can move forward. However, that led to the problem there, in the starting room, you might have too many people, so we capped at 16, which made sense, which was our max minimum size room, and that made sense with the chess rules of having 16 pieces. All right, so then there's the victory condition. In chess, it's checkmate. In Chogue, there is sort of that spirit. You need to capture the black king, although it's not technically checkmate, it's a capture. In chess, you never actually capture, you just checkmate. And in Rogue, we were uneducated, I guess, even though I've been playing Rogue since the 80s. I always assumed it was infinite levels. So we thought that was what we were bouncing off against. But we had decided to put the Black King at some point, and you could capture him, and that was the end. However, some of our testers resisted that because when you're playing something that looks like a roguelike, if you're doing a good run, you don't want to stop there. And so they were frustrated by the fact that there would be an end at some point, while they still felt they could go some more levels. So we tested this in-between place where you would win, but you could continue exploring if the player would decide that they were more roguelike in their intentions. And we're about to release, actually, when Pippin came to the meeting saying, Jonathan, you know what? Rogue has an ending. And you all maybe know this, but to us it was like, oh, right, really? And for those maybe a handful who don't know, the ending of Rogue is at level 26, the Amulet of Yendor spawns, and if you take it, then you can start backtracking to level 0, where you get this really underwhelming victory, because it will take years and years and years to do this. And apparently, your whole point was to sell your loot at great profit. So that's it. So we had it all solved for us now, because the point would be to go out and capture the king, which immediately became the king of Yendor, to our great merriment. And once you captured him, you would have to go back to the surface, so adding many, many other levels to the game. And you would surface back to the original level with whatever kind of party that was left with you. And you would have the flavor text that's the exact same one as in Rogue. You've captured the King of Yendor, you journey home and sell all your loot at a great profit, and are admitted to the Grandmaster's Guild. So this is a screenshot of the only player we know that has actually finished the game. So if you will go out and do finish it, please tell us, we'd be curious. The only one other that I know is Pippin. I never made it, but that makes sense because he's the better chess player, obviously. So anyways, we had our ending cornered. We're happy. This is Chogue. So we have our little trajectory, our little design matrix, and we've checked the boxes, and this is one of the possible Chogues. It's now called Classic Chogue, and we're happy with it. But there are other possible Chogues, so it sort of hints at us they're begging to be born, you know? And so we're working now on Cherry Chogue, which is much roguier, where that's what I was hinting at a bit earlier on. So we might, at some point, release that one. So Cherry Chogue, we just switch out some of the little boxes, and it changes things quite dramatically. So I can maybe show a little example of an earlier build. So for example, here I can try, in this case, the units have hit points that are equivalent to their value in chess. For example, a rook has 5 points. And if I try to eat this pawn, okay, so and it's an opportunity for me to show our superb chess notations, or Chogue notations. We had to make up, to extend the algebraic notation so that it could reflect everything that can happen in Chogue. And we merged it with the messages that are generated in Rogue, so we have both of them at the same time. And in this case, I'll try to eat that rook there, and it's likely that I might not make it. You see? I just chipped away at it, and I can see these messages. Your rook swings and hits the rook, and the rook swings and hits your knight. So it changes things because it's not, you don't have the immediate capture thing. Anyway, so that's part of Cherry Chogue right now. And maybe to finish, a little subtleties. So yes, there's the Chogue notation. For example, we had to invent a new way to signify that you've hit at something, but you haven't captured it. It seems like a very subtle thing, but we're happy to have come up with a consistent Chogue notation to be able to express what a game looked like. And finally, some notes on the visual design. So this is where we maybe were more freer in our interpretation. Because chess doesn't have a specification for representation, so I felt I could do whatever I wanted with this. But I still wanted to hint at Rogue, and this is why everything in there is just Unicode characters. It's not the ASCII characters, but they're Unicode characters. And the CGA palette, which evokes, at least to some extent, the early style computing. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. We have time for some questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Do the enemy pieces also have the same visibility rules?
So did the enemies have these same visibility rules? No, they don't. Chogue was taxed to be unfair because of this. Our own getaway with this question is that you yourself can also eat something that's in the darkness, meaning that since you always have the possibility to go as far as, for example, your rook or your queen goes, if that end point is actually another piece, you will eat it even though you didn't see it. So our own kind of personal explanation is that that's what the AI is doing. It's just going towards its maximum possibility. But of course, that's fake because the AI does know where you are and will just target you. So yes, it's a bit unfair.
Why did you go with the name Cherry Chogue? Why does not appear either in Rogue or chess as a
Yeah, I don't know if Pippin has an answer for this. He came up with it. I guess it's because Chogue evokes Coke, and you have Cherry Coke, which is maybe the softer version of Coke. And Cherry Chogue is somewhat a bit more, it's a bit easier because it's not as drastic. You get killed on one shot. So I guess we're happy, though it's not from either of them. So I guess it could be, we could pull away maybe the Kestrel Chogue or whatever.
So did you consider in Rogue you can pause like in Go, a move is not mandatory, where chess is mandatory? Was that one of your axes that you looked at?
So I didn't know you could pause in Rogue, but I'm happy to know that because when the AI doesn't find a valid move, it actually doesn't move. And I always thought that was inelegant, and I hope nobody would ever notice. But now I can just say the enemy passes. But the player can't. Although you can resign. That was a big thing for Pippin because he says, in chess, when you know you're not going to get anywhere, you resign. That's what chess players do. So it's a bit hidden, but when you select your king, you can resign, and that will just restart if you feel that you won't ever go anywhere. We were accused, by the way, by the chess players. So we have two, let's say, communities we're talking to, the roguelike lovers and the chess lovers. And chess lovers, some of them, we didn't have too many feedback, but some of them had very hard, well, some of them were, most of them were interested, but they had very harsh feedback with us not implementing all the rules. So for example, castling doesn't exist, mostly because of laziness. And the one that I had never even thought about is en passant rule, which is a very edge rule. If you're just an amateur chess player, you probably don't know about it. But we had 2 chess players tell us, wait a minute, I can't do en passant rules. Really? So maybe in Cherry Chogue we'll implement en passant.
Hello, this is a question. When will you create an editor so we can make chess dungeons and put our friends through them?
An
That's
editor?
awesome. Yeah,
an
so
editor's-
like we can make chess dungeons and say, here, buddy, solve this to our
Oh
friend.
yeah, so
That'd be rad.
player-generated chess dungeons. So that's interesting because at the beginning what we thought this game would be about is generated chess problems. You know, there's interesting setup that was generated and you need to go through it with an arbitrary space and all that. And it turns out in the later levels, some rooms are real chess problems because you only have maybe 2 pieces left. You need to go through that room and there are 3 queens and 2 rooks. And you know, these moments are super hard. And for further work, we were interested in just pushing that further, but still we're looking at procedural generation, but maybe user generation would be much better. Probably, but then we fall into chess problems, and that's a whole field.
Are there any other board game RLs that you're really curious how they'd work?
Any other what?
Board game RLs? So like a game other than chess crossed with Rogue.
Yeah, I don't know. Are there? I assume there must be. Chess Rogue. Yeah, we always thought that there would be probably some kind of precedence somewhere, but definitely it opens a whole genre of chess-like. So we're thinking of Chiv, the chess civilization, and or Chist, the chess mist, where you have to solve these problems. So Pippin and I were like, hey, maybe we have our whole end of career figured out that we're just gonna do these chess-likes forever.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.